If I read the temper of our people correctly, we now realize, as we have never realized before, our interdependence on each other. That we cannot merely take, but we must give as well. That if we are to go forward, we must move as a trained and loyal army, willing to sacrifice for the good of a common discipline. Because without such discipline, no progress is made, no leadership becomes effective. We are, I know, ready and willing to submit our lives and property to such discipline, because it makes possible a leadership which aims at a larger good. This I propose to offer, pledging that the larger purposes will bind upon us all as a sacred obligation, with a unity of duty, hitherto evoked only in time of war. With this pledge taken, I assume unhesitatingly the leadership of this great army of our people, dedicated to a disciplined attack upon our common problems. Action, in this image and to this end, is feasible under the form of government which we have inherited from our ancestors. Our Constitution is so simple and practical that it is possible always to meet extraordinary needs by changes in emphasis and arrangement without loss of essential form. That is why our constitutional system has proved itself the most superbly enduring political mechanism the modern world has produced. It has met every stress of vast expansion of territory, of foreign wars, of bitter internal strife, of world relations. It is to be hoped that the normal balance of executive and legislative authority may be wholly adequate to meet the unprecedented task before us. But it may be that an unprecedented demand and need for undelayed action may call for temporary departure from that normal balance of public procedure. I am prepared under my constitutional duty to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require. These measures are such other measures as the Congress may build out of experience and wisdom. I shall seek, within my constitutional authority, to bring to speedy adoption. But in the event that the Congress shall fail to take one of these two courses, and in the event that the national emergency is still critical, I shall not evade the clear course of duty that will then confront me. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency, as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign enemy. For the trust reposed in me, I will return the courage and the devotion that befit the time. I can do no less. We face the arduous days that lie before us in the warm courage of the national unity, with a clear consciousness of seeking old and precious moral values, with a clean satisfaction that comes from the stern performance of duty by old and young alike. We aim at the assurance of a rounded and permanent national life. We do not distrust the future of essential democracy. The people of the United States have not failed. In their need, they have registered a mandate that they want direct, vigorous action. They have asked for discipline and direction under leadership. They have made me the present instrument of their wishes. In the spirit of the gift, I take it. In this dedication of a nation, we humbly ask the blessing of God. May He protect each and every one of us. May He guide me in the days to come.
Hello, Justin Hatrix.
Welcome, everybody. Curtis, good to see you. Everybody, so Curtis Yarvin is here with us tonight. Curtis is the creator of Urbit, a peer-to-peer operating system and network. Curtis is the creator of Urbit. He created it in 2002 and led its development until its first release in 2013. At that time, he co-founded Tlon Corporation with Galen Wolf-Pauly. About 6 years later, in 2019, Yarvin left Tlon and the Urbit project altogether. He retained a non-voting minority interest in the project, but completely removed himself from day-to-day operations. Then just earlier this week, it was announced that he was returning to the Urbit ecosystem in a leadership role. He recently published a written address on Twitter, but I think he just wanted to explain his perspective live and open himself up to direct questions from the Urbit community. And just to be clear, I'm here in no official capacity myself. I was just asked to facilitate this live stream, and I said I'm happy to. So yeah, Curtis would like to speak, and then he'll be taking questions, specifically those submitted through the radio app on Urbit, where this broadcast is being streamed, in addition to where it's being streamed on Twitter and YouTube. Curtis, please.
Thank you so much, Justin. Wow, it's been a very complicated week. It's been about a week since all this stuff started going down, and I know you Urbiters out there are very curious about what happened and what's going on and why. So let me start by, first of all, if you're hoping for me dishing drama and ragging on people and you have fun with that, I'm afraid that's really not going to happen. And it's not going to happen not because there is drama to dish. There isn't really drama to dish, or maybe there is, because the thing is, what you see when you're sort of seeing everything clearly, is you see hopefully everyone's motivation. And I feel like the motivation of everyone in this situation has been sort of really good, and the conflicts come from differing perceptions. And I'd like to kind of, not necessarily challenge those differing perceptions, but sort of bring them kind of in contact with my perception. So what is my perception? My perception is that the goal of the Urbit Foundation is to advance Urbit. And this is obvious. This is a tautology in a way. But what do I really mean by that? What I really mean by that is that what we're trying to create in Urbit here is a society. It's, you could adopt Balaji's Srinivasan's idea of the network state, and you could call it a state. And it certainly acted a little like a state lately. But really, the important point is that Urbit is a society. And so when you look at this society, you see a network of people that are connected by these funny Urbit names we use. Specifically, if you hear me use the word azimuth, azimuth is just the name of the Ethereum contract that provides these names. So like I'm Namtiv, and that's just a randomly assigned name. It sounds like a human being's name in some kind of science fiction novel. They're easy to remember. One of the fun things about coming back to Urbit after a few years is finding that these names really, really stick in my head, and they sort of really work socially in a way. And the thing that I like best about them is there are two things that I like best about them, as opposed to the sort of personal names, like the handles that you're used to using. One is that they're actually impersonal. And we've all had the experience of going to some sort of quasi-professional, context, like say Wikipedia, and there's a very interesting conversation going on between gay brown cow 34 and and it's just like, do I really need to hear that you decided you should be called gay brown cow 34? No, I don't. Historic name 5 would be much better. The second, of course, is that these are 32-bit names, meaning that they're actually limited in supply. And so there's only 4 billion of them. And that obviously we have far fewer than 4 billion users, but that still creates an environment where you don't have an infinite supply of new names, and that makes it easier to cope with spam. Of course, Urbit still needs to get bigger to have any spam problems at all, but it's actually, you've got to design to succeed. And so that is really, to me, that system of names, azimuth, despite being maybe 1%, if that, of the technical work in Urbit, the society of people who interact in this way, the network of people who interact in this way, because a network is a set of social connections as well as a set of actual literal packet networking connections. That network, to me, is Urbit. And that's, of course, a system of decentralized identities. One of the nice things about an Urbit name, as opposed to, for example, your handle on Twitter. If you have a handle on Twitter, Twitter owns it and you don't own it. So that's a centralized name which Twitter assigns to you at its convenience. When we go to a system of decentralized names, again, there's two kinds of decentralized names. There are names like ENS names, which are human legible names. Gay brown cow is back here, and you have to register that name. Of course, there are trademark ownership issues. And in addition, people would just immediately squat up all the good names. And so you have to basically register that and keep paying rent on it. You don't really own it. You have an exclusive, if you keep paying rent on it, no one can take it from you, but you have to keep paying rent on it. And so that's a different kind of name altogether. And these names also, besides being decentralized identities, are also network addresses. So an Urbit name is the same length as an IPv4 address. In fact, some friends of mine are doing something relatively similar to Tailscale, where they're actually using Urbit names as network addresses for an IP overlay network. Of course, the original design and still, of course, the design of Arvo, the decentralized operating system, which is 99% of the work of the Urbit Foundation, is to use these as network addresses. And so when you say, okay, what is Urbit? Urbit is two things. Urbit is a system of decentralized identities, and it's also a decentralized operating system. Which operating system, it's decentralized in the sense that every operating system is decentralized. There's a number of different, nodes, but the idea of this operating system is that you are going to run your own node. You are going to have your own personal server on the internet, and the way you use computing in 10 years is going to be, rather than having 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 different logins to other people's servers wherever you have apps, you're going to have 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 different apps on your own personal server that you own and control. That is our vision of the future, and that vision of the future is obviously the real future. It's not going to change. It hasn't changed, and it won't change. And so the definition of Urbit is this combination, again, of decentralized identity and decentralized computing. And what I'm changing in our emphasis and sort of the result, both the cause of why the shit show had to happen and the solution to the problem, is that we're essentially saying, these decentralized identities are really cool. People love Urbit. They love the idea of I control my own identity. They love the idea of we're creating a network of these identities. We're creating a network that's basically, as Galen Atlan says, the internet for people who hate the internet. And it all it rings a huge bell for me in a way, because I'm so old that I was actually on the early internet. I was on the internet in the 80s, and kind of restoring the feeling of the internet in the 80s is sort of what we're trying to get to in many ways. And you may ask, well, isn't that a little ambitious, considering that Urbit has mere thousands of users, and there are plenty of bigger networks, and the internet, of course, is ginormous. And let me lay out sort of my theory of success, essentially, for any system like this one. Some of you may have heard of Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe's law is a law. I mean, it's a law stating that the value of a network is the square, as the square is O of n log n. Let's just say it's the square. It's the square of the number of people on the network. So a network of one person is completely useless, but once you get 10 people, the number of connections that you can make is 10 times 10. It's 10 squared. And when you start to get up to really, really high numbers, you start to see the power of the internet. So the internet, for example, when it was young, was not the only game in town. The internet was essentially the American competitor to become the network of the future. It had a European competitor, the OSI networking stack, which I think in many ways is probably technically better. I don't remember the details. But as the internet developed more of a network effect, it simply left OSI and Novell NetWare and all of these other things in the dust due to Metcalfe's law. And so essentially the job of any network in any sense is to basically take advantage of Metcalfe's law to become a global standard. And the thing about basically, especially networks that are literally networks where people send packets to each other, is that they tend to have a very winner takes all quality to them. It's just not possible for another network to compete with the internet. Even if you could build a bridge to, say, an OSI network, what would it even mean to have a bridge? Because everything speaks in completely different and incompatible protocols. And so you're always basically like, you're just looking for that advantage of size in a way. You're looking to scale that. And so, once something is bigger than all the other things, unless something stops its growth, it's going to, just completely continue growing. So when you look at sort of the theory of success of any network, and success is the most brittle, we're all here to succeed, we're all here to win, nobody's here to lose. When you look at basically the theory of success, or the probability of success of a network, or even the expected value of a network, or even the predicted value of a network, you have to ask the question, okay, what is this thing worth when it becomes the standard network that connects all of humanity and solves this problem? Then you're like, what is the chance that this problem actually needs to be solved, that we actually need a network of this type? And what is the chance that this is the network that actually does it? And when I look at all of those variables, they seem extremely high to me. So when you imagine a world in which basically Urbit is the standard of sort of the digital identity of a responsible individual. Obviously, there are more than 4 billion people on Earth, but there are definitely not more than 4 billion responsible adults on Earth. And we have a wholly separate system for essentially dependent accounts. Then, essentially having an Urbit planet becomes something that everyone needs, just like they need internet access. So we're clearly talking trillions of dollars here, not to be crude and talk about money. When we look at the chance that something like this is needed, I feel like we all sort of see the flaws of centralized systems today. That was very, very difficult to explain 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I would go around trying to pitch this system, and I would say, okay, in theory, this could be good for online freedom of speech, but in reality, anyone will let you post anything you want on Blogger. So does it really matter? I think we've come to a place where we realize, wow, it actually really does matter. Because when these centralized systems started to take off, they were all built in the 90s and early 2000s by people who all had the kind of early internet ethos that I did. Probably everyone like me in like 1994 expected that everybody was going to have their own internet node in the future. That turned out to not be the case because it turns out that running a Linux server on the public internet is a professional skill like flying a 747. And so the problem of creating an operating system where running a true network server is not like being the pilot of a 747 became sort of the essential problem here. And the fundamental theory of Arvo as an operating system is that the technical simplicity of the system should lead to a level of robustness and simplicity that actually lets people run their own nodes. Are we there yet? No, I don't think we're there yet. And understanding that we are understanding that we're not there yet. By the way, I've just received a report that due to the extraordinary interest in this broadcast, Urbit Radio is lagging a little bit in the broadcast. Someone said just a second or two. I guess it's different for
I don't think it's a problem either way.
Yeah. Okay, good. Let's keep going. So in any case, basically, when we look at the question of does the world need a fully decentralized computing environment? And I would add to this decentralized computing environment, by the way, one of the things that I strongly believe in, and the kind of, we haven't realized this yet, obviously, but sort of all the technical ingredients are here to do this. Generally, when we think of running in a hosted environment, we think of, we put our data in the cloud, and then whoever's hosting the cloud can see all that data, can violate our privacy, can be ordered by various powers that be to violate our privacy. And you're like, okay, I have to self-host this in a physical box at home, or it's not private. Well, there's a wonderful technology called, some IBM calls it confidential computing, some call it secure enclaves, that actually allows a hosting service. I think, the latest Intel and AMD server chips, all have this, that allows you to run code in a little box on the server that even your host actually can't see. And this is really the path to digital nirvana, which is that you have decentralized identity, decentralized computing, and confidential computing. And once you're there, and you're not going to go anywhere else. So essentially, if you believe that a system like this is worth a lot, and you believe that it's going to happen at some point, your only question is it going to happen with Urbit, or is it going to happen with some other system of decentralized identity and decentralized computing? And certainly there are other people trying this, and good luck to them in a way, but we've been working on it for a long time, and we think we have some pretty good technology. But are we there yet? No, I don't think we're there yet. And that really leads to the question of what is this change in direction that we're performing? Why the change in direction? And what does this mean about the state of the system? What I would say, building an operating system is hard. Even with basically all of the and Urbit is Arvo, which is Urbit's operating system, again, and for Arvo Pärt, the Finnish composer. Arvo, has all of these structures of beautiful simplicity in them. It runs on a virtual machine whose specification fits on a t-shirt. And, the goal of the system is to basically take this kind of fundamental mathematical simplicity of Nock and maintain that simplicity all the way to user space, so we create something that's simple and easy to use. That's not a small amount of work, even given the simplicity of functional operating systems. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of management even in coordinating the work that's done on the system, it's just not easy. And because it's just not easy, Urbit ran into a problem over the last couple of years where it basically has the system that's actually like Arvo is amazingly close to the skull. The fact that it works as well as it does, the fact that this is going out to you through this radio app that's basically, a combined, it's a radio station with a text, conversation in this, and we'll head over there for the AMA. You can ask questions if you're on Urbit. If you're not on Urbit, you can listen, or you can talk amongst yourselves in the YouTube chat, but I don't think that will be heard in the same way. We've got, Justin says there's 1,150 people online right now, which is pretty good. And what happened, I would say, over the last couple of years is that basically we realized that people realized that this thing was needed. And the result was that this amazing result where Urbit as a society became a success. I think that basically most of this really has to be put down or given credit for the CEO, my former co-founder, Galen Wolf-Pauly of Talon, because essentially the reason why Galen and I made such a good fit is that our backgrounds are so different. I'm a former computer science grad student, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Galen is a former art school student. He went to Cooper Union. He throws great parties. I have no idea how to throw a party. And, he really understood not just the goal of creating Urbit as a society. He understood something much deeper and more interesting, which is a rule I sometimes state as the quality of a social network can only decline. And because the quality of a social network can only decline, if you're trying to build the world's largest social network, which we obviously are, what's really important is that if you're aiming for large size, because your quality can only decline, you have to start with a very, very high quality group of people. This is why Facebook was objectively worth more than MySpace way back in 2004 or whatever it was, when Facebook had 1,000 users and MySpace had 50 million users. Facebook was more valuable because all those 1,000 users were at Harvard. Say what you will about Harvard. I've said some negative things about Harvard in my time, but it's basically, you don't have to like the hierarchy of status in our society to accept that it exists. It does exist, and Harvard is at the peak of it. And so Facebook's strategy for growing that social network was essentially to view the sort of human quality of society as a pyramid. And they did what we call in computer science a breadth first search. So, they started in actually the bike room at the Porcellian, which is the most chic social club at Harvard. And then they went to all of Harvard. And then they're like, all right, fine, Yale. And they invited the Yale people in, and then they went to the rest of the Ivy League, and then they went to Cornell. Sorry, everyone has to laugh at the Cornell joke. And then they went to Cornell, and then they did the rest of colleges. And there's a whole world of like Americans of a certain age who were in high school when this happened. And they remember when Facebook gave access to high school students, and they were like, this is amazing. And so essentially, following that sort of top-down pyramid structure requires you to start with a group, whether it's at Harvard or not, of very, very high-quality people. And essentially, my view is that what gives Urbit the power to take over the world, of course, in a very, very friendly sense of giving it the service that they want, is that we have started with an amazingly high quality group of people. And those are people that basically were recruited that were brought in by the sort of amazing, like, social curation acumen of Galen Wolf-Pauly at Tlon, because it wasn't just social curation, it was design, it was a look, it was a style, it was a feel. And the result is that you go to an Urbit assembly, of which I've only been to one of, and you're just like, these are amazing people. And it's those amazing people and that amazing society that is essentially sort of the one base of what Urbit is. And then the other base of what Urbit is this purely functional decentralized operating system, Arvo. So far, so good. I would say, and then you're like, okay, that sounds great. What went wrong? And I would say that what went wrong, the first thing that went wrong was the crypto boom and the NFT boom. And the crypto boom and the NFT boom were absolutely great in a lot of ways for a lot of people. And they basically made a lot of money for a lot of projects. Urbit was always in these days when like the big crypto money was flowing. Urbit, for various reasons, you know, including our tremendous and sincere respect for, you know, securities regulation, and especially the spirit of securities law. A lot of these companies went out and said, let's do an ICO. Let's get grandma to give us as much money as she wants. We're going to make grandma rich. And they pulled in a lot of money, and then the bust happened and their token price went down a lot. And they were left with basically this like big pile of money and this memory of being rich. Urbit never cashed in like this. Like, and part of that was just this like feeling that among a lot of people that there was kind of something wrong with this market. I think, again, I have to credit Galen here for better or for worse, because he basically saw, he was just like, something doesn't smell right here. And so by failing to sort of, you know, take the hors d'oeuvres when they were being passed around in this sense, it sort of left us with our integrity intact, but it also left us without a ton of money. And, you know, I was talking to Galen about this fairly recently, and his point, which was very interesting, was that sort of all these projects that took a ton of money just basically wound up just becoming completely ineffective at the developer level of this. It's like they were just like strangled by gold. And having seen in the dot-com era what happens to a company whose share price is overvalued, like work stops. You become completely ineffective. It's horrifying. Urbit, because it didn't have a huge ton of money in the bank, was not as afflicted by this as other projects, and it sort of remained healthier in some ways. But it still basically was the subject of the NFT boom. It's still, you looked at the, you know, the market capitalization of this whole giant namespace that we're trying to create, and it got up into the billions with a B of dollars. And basically that made everyone look at this project and basically adopt, I think, a view that was very understandable at the time, but I think was in retrospect fatally wrong, where they looked at this, and one of the definitions of a startup, this is due to a great Paul Graham essay, one of the definitions of a startup is the difference between am I default alive or default dead? Meaning if I just fly the plane straight and level and basically just, you know, everybody just kind of gets their job done like they're working in Apple or something, is this going to succeed or is it going to fail? And if your answer is you're Apple, basically all Tim Cook really has to do is fly that plane straight and level and not screw up. You know, all Google has to do is fly that plane straight and level and not screw up. No acrobatic maneuvers are required. When you're a startup, however, basically, you always have to consider the possibility that like serious maneuvering is going to happen. And I would say that basically the reason why the board of the Urbit Foundation decided to make this management change was that we were in essentially that sort of mindset of, you know, we're default alive and all we really have to do is sort of execute straight and level. kind of resulted in a phenomenon that pilots call controlled flight into terrain. And, the controlled flight into terrain, sort of caught everybody's attention in a way and required us to make, huge transitions. And so, the first change that was needed was essentially that actually, because of running out of money, the runway was close to an end. And so what was about to happen was that all of the core Arvo developers were about to be laid off, which is obviously a serious problem for an organization which is doing the combination of decentralized identity and decentralized computing. The decentralized identity system is already on the blockchain. It lives sort of, whenever this lives. But, if Arvo dies, this project loses its future. I think the present, I'm going to return to the enormous value of this namespace, but I was just like, we can't let Arvo die. And I'm happy to report that, due to the extraordinary commitment of the Urbit Foundation staff and their basically willingness to accept payment in Urbit stars rather than cash, we've extended our runway to a point which is completely manageable for our plans, which is amazing. And just all thanks to the board, to the new interim executive director, Topher Colby. Topher is it's like a prep name. He's very prep. I don't know what's going on there. And Christopher you can call him Chris. He answers to Chris on this Topher thing. And the board has been absolutely amazing here in helping us turn the situation around. And, for those who regard this as a coup, I like the word coup, so I'm not going to say, oh, it wasn't a coup, right? First of all, this was not an action that I took in any way, because I had actually, when I left Urbit, Justin alluded to this earlier, when I left Urbit in 2019, I was very careful to remove all of my power over the system. And so I basically gave the voting power of my Tlon shares back to Tlon. I now own 0 Tlon shares. I gave all of my galaxies, and the galaxies elect the board in what's called the Galactic Synod. Very, very Star Wars. And I gave all those galaxies away to Tlon employees. And I essentially kind of removed myself from any power over this system in order to kind of let it flourish on its own. Some people believe I was kicked out. I was not kicked out. I had to argue with Galen very, very hard before he would let me leave. And so essentially I was just like, okay, this thing will be bigger and stronger if it sort of survives as a collective project without the great leader at the head. It has to sort of transition, especially technically, especially in the area of technical leadership. It has to transition from being a cult of personality to something really much more like an open source project. Some open source projects are, of course, cults of personality. But to have really kind of collective architectural technical leadership. And one of the things that's so sort of sad about this, sort of almost hitting the mountains here, just imagine you're in a cockpit and it's like, pull up, terrain, right? One of the things that's really sad about this is that we're trying very, very hard to fix is that I think after a lot of growing pains and struggling, basically Arvo as I would call it an applied research project is doing really, really well. And there's there's sort of 3 kinds of technical work that you can be doing on a project like Arvo. One of them is maintenance and scalability and basically maturity and robustness work. I think we're in agreement. I think everyone is in agreement within the system that not enough of this work was being done, that more of this work needs to be done, that basically the sort of the general robustness of the system really, really needs to be shored up. I would give as an example of the system, one of the crucial ways of developing a new operating system is to self-host, is to make sure that the people who develop the operating system are using it in anger, as they say. They're not just playing with it, they're using it every day, and when it breaks, they see it. Because frankly, when an operating system has a bug, the chance that the developers of that operating system will get a bug report is about 1 in 100. So you actually need to catch that. You actually need to see what's needed, and the best way to do that is to use it itself. And so I come in and I sort of look at, some of the evangelism that's been done, and I'm like, wow, you know, a lot of the goal over the last 2 years was building things on top of Urbit, sort of building out, building projects, building grants, whatever. And some of these things, these projects worked out, and some of them you're just sort of, you have this core surrounded by a large penumbra of kind of dead code. And I'm like, if we'd spent the last 5 years basically, moving Urbit development itself off of GitHub onto Urbit's native revision control system and file system, Clay, then we wouldn't have some of the problems we have now. This is especially affects, again, this robustness issue, especially affects Tlon. Now, what is Tlon? Tlon is the company that I originally started with Galen Wolf-Pauly to promote Urbit. And the Urbit Foundation was spun out of Tlon to basically do the work on the sort of core development of Arvo as a system. And then Tlon is there to put a beautiful user interface on that and build, I think their mission is building beautiful tools to connect people. And so Tlon is building out, the sort of the user interface, the user experience, of course. That's kind of the core of Galen's talents. I wouldn't know how to design a user interface, if it hit me over the head. And one of the things that they've basically struggled with, especially in onboarding people, is they've basically found the maturity of the system has really, and of the operating system underneath what Tlon is supposed to be doing, has really impacted the growth of that network and that community. And so that's been basically a real problem. And so when we look at sort of the kind of maintenance and robustness, and especially just going for really like a system as simple, as technically fundamental and simple as this, should it be able to have just amazing aerospace grade quality? It should just be like, you couldn't imagine this thing breaking. And definitely when people who've played around with Urbit and tried to use Urbit and had the Urbit experience, like, they would not say, I can't imagine this thing breaking. And so that's an area in which we've fallen short. The second area in which we, in some ways, have fallen a little bit long is that basically one of the things about, I can't stress to people who aren't computer scientists how goddamn weird the system is. In some ways, I myself really went over the top on that. I do regret deciding that for, abstract mathematical reasons, we should treat 0 as true and 1 as false. I can't even count the number. It's way too late to fix that. It's completely unchangeable, but I can't even count the number of bugs that my weird purity instinct there has caused. But this is basically, it's just a complete redesign of all of system software. It doesn't have anything in common really with 20th century system software, except basically core algorithms, which, work the same on Alpha Centauri as it does here. And that's cool and that's great. And I did that not because I wanted to do ooh, I'm so cool, I'm do this clever, crazy thing that's not, I was just like, no, actually, the real fundamental problem of why we don't have decentralized operating systems here, even though we have an operating system that could be decentralized, is that operating system is Unix, and it was originally designed for mini computers in 1975. And so I'm just like, wow, this thing really, really does need to be rethought. But the thing is, when you're a computer scientist, when you're a hacker, when you're any of those sorts of things, like you really come in and you love the opportunity to redesign from scratch. It's called non-invented here, theory. You're just like, oh my God, I'm creating as though no one has ever existed before. It's really, really fun. And that feeling of fun is dangerous because it can pull you away from reality in a lot of ways. And unless you're sort of completely in control of that feeling and your feeling of like, let's have a lot of fun here, you wind up doing, frankly, something that's a lot like academic CS research, where you're just like kind of out there, moseying on these like long, you're doing like I don't know, for guitar players like Joe Satriani, sort of research. You're just like, wow, how many 16th notes, how many 64th notes can I play, in 3 seconds, right? And it becomes this thing where you're kind of feeding your own ego and you're feeding your own vanity. And I've made that mistake. Everybody who does basically advanced software has made the mistake of kind of feeding their own vanity in various ways. And this is why really the sweet spot is like this area of like applied research that's really, really narrow. And yet, between these kind of the space of like kind of straight ahead maintenance and like, being what they call an architecture astronaut, lies this really sweet space of basically like applied research. And so when you look at, what's sort of amazing about where this team is and why I wanted to sort of struggle so hard to maintain it, despite the Urbit Foundation having fiscal problems, which of course we're trying to fix as we speak. I was reminded by someone to note that the Urbit Foundation is not the only company in the ecosystem. And, if you add all the companies in the ecosystem together, you're looking at like $15 million in cash. So this is not exactly a non-solvable problem, guys, for, about a zillion different reasons. But the reason why is so important for me to save this team and save sort of the Arvo as a development project is that when I looked at what they were doing, I saw that people who weren't me had basically come into this position of leadership, really, in doing this kind of applied research that basically, really hits that kind of sweet spot of building something real. And so just for an example, like, I kept hearing about this like shrubbery project. I'm like, what is shrubbery? That's a really dumb name. Shrubbery, right? And I looked at it and I realized that it had some vague connections to an idea that I'd had, when I was leaving in 2019, but only really, really vague. And the core of the idea is essentially like, maybe even the concept of an application is basically something that is just a result of 1970s mini computer use. And maybe instead of an application, we just sort of have these kind of interacting data structures with code bound to them in a way that's a little more like kind of spreadsheet like almost. And because a spreadsheet, although computer scientists give spreadsheets no respect at all, like actually it's one of the coolest ideas out there and it like never dies, but it's like Excel is the only thing in your computer that works this way. And so, attempts to do this kind of attempts to do things like this existed in the kind of 90s object-oriented era. People kind of tried them. Like there's like, if you're really an operating systems nerd, you might have heard of Caligent or Kaleida. Those were big attempts to do, OpenDoc back from, I think that was an Apple IBM thing related to Caligent back in the 90s, have tried to do this. But they basically keep running into the problem that they're sort of in this kind of same old operating systems, context. And so, to sort of break out of that old context in a way that's really transformative, not just for the ease of building software, but really transforms the user experience, is sort of the, the aim of this like shrubbery and sky projects. Sky is kind of a browser for shrubbery. I don't know if the word browser isn't really right either, but you're just like, this is transformative and also applied computer science research. This is sort of like, I look at this and I'm like, this is what we're here to do. And I'm like, this project is about to be killed. And like, this is not acceptable. And I'm just like, we have to find a way to change this, because I feel like this is going sort of off the rails in a way. And when I see like academic research that doesn't have this kind of grounding, I want to shoot it in the head as much as anyone else. Not that it can't be interesting and fun and cool to play around with things like that, but like, saving that future is really, really important. Okay. But the thing that basically I sort of ran into in the thesis of the way that applied research was being done was that I felt that, it was essentially being rushed, because, the idea was of the sort of the internal thinking, which was very much the internal thinking of this kind of straight and level flight, is like, oh, we're bringing on these new features, we're coming into the future, and as these new features come online, users are going to love it. That's going to drive user growth, and that's going to sort of turn the whole kind of engine in a way. And the idea that you're going to do kind of applied systems research, and that's basically going to get to a polished user experience that is exactly the right thing in a matter of months, is to me just not realistic. It's like, it would take a lot of luck. Actually, one of the things that I did, people are like, wow, you came up with the idea of Urbit in 2002 and you released it in 2013. Like, what were you doing for all that time? Because the number of lines of code that you wrote doesn't seem to be that great. And I was like, well, I was writing them over and over again because they came out wrong the first time. And if you're basically doing this kind of research, or anything that's research, it is not going to come out right the first time. And so when we pull the lens back, remember how I started this conversation? I'm like, Urbit is a society of decentralized identities, and each of these decentralized identities gets its own decentralized computer where your data is going to live in the long term. It's going to be owned and controlled by you, and your decentralized identity becomes the network address for this magic private computer in the cloud. That is the future we are building. That is the future of Urbit. And I don't think anyone wants to, if anyone wants to compromise on that future, it's not me. And one of the things, in the turmoil of the last week, there's been a lot of chaos. There's been a lot of miscommunication. There's been a lot of things that, oh my God, I wish I had that to do over again. There's a lot of people who I've basically pissed off by unintentionally disrespecting. And I look back and I'm just like, how did I fuck that up? Right. And it's like, well, again, you're not going to get it right the first time. Like I'd never been involved in a situation like this. The board is, full of people with a lot of business experience. They've never done anything like this. Like, it's pretty rare that a board has to take control of a company. A board is not, people call it corporate governance. Well, the UF is a foundation, not a company, but a board is a board. People call the board corporate governance, and that's really, really wrong. Actually, in any company in which the board, or still more the shareholders, stakeholders, call them what you will, has to get involved, it's like something has already gone wrong if the board is involved. What was going wrong here is fairly straightforward. Like, the foundation was out of money. And the foundation was out of money because, and I'll skip forward to that in a little bit, the foundation was out of money because basically the Urbit star market, which it relied on, to basically sell its assets of, I think, 25 galaxies, which is 6,000 stars or something, was broken. And so, the star price, which peaked at 20 or $30,000 was had fallen to less than $1,000. It's back up a little bit. I think we've already reversed that curve, but in a way, it doesn't matter what the star price is now because this is a broken market, which is not clearing. There's no particular liquidity. I'll get into basically the problem and the solution of that a little bit later. And so, this plane that was flying straight and level was basically flying straight and level into the sort of the base of a mountain. And the problem with flying into the mountain was this sort of assumption that basically we had to deliver decentralized identity and a decentralized society and a decentralized operating system at the same time. And so the society wound up getting blocked on the operating system. People wanted to come in, they wanted to join the party, they wanted to be part of this cool thing, and then they ran into a lot of technical barriers, some of which could be ameliorated, some of which can't. When something's supposed to be your new digital life and it crashes, wow, I've really lost. You lose a lot of trust. You lose, and you churn. Moreover, basically, in terms of the experience that we created, we found that a lot of people wanted the society to exist, but creating an experience compelling enough to keep them there was not as easy as just sort of relying on the fact that they wanted to exist. And so those things were sort of dragging the system down. The Urbit Foundation basically, again, for reasons that look really, really sensible in retrospect, but I think were just wrong, sort of reasoned, okay, we need users on the network. We need to grow the society. What's the way to grow the society? Let's have more apps. Let's have more apps that will pull users in. And they went out and they gave a lot of grants and they did a lot of developer programs and they really worked very, very hard and very professionally on this stuff because really, especially under Josh, I want to take a moment to praise Josh, the former executive director of the Urbit Foundation, because what Josh is very, very professional. And basically, the thing that was wrong with Tlon in a lot of ways when it was just me and Galen was the was just that we were just a ragtag group of it was not the most professionally run company. I, unlike Josh, am not a really terribly skilled manager. I'm an architect. I'm a strategist. I'm not a manager. And so I think that, Tlon was basically did not sort of meet the highest standards of professional operation. And that's something that's been fixed, both at Tlon, from what I hear, and at the Urbit Foundation, under Josh and under, various capable people working with Galen and Galen himself, of course. And so it's great to have that. But the thing is that when you have that in the context of we're default alive and you believe that you've already succeeded and you believe you've already succeeded because, look how much our stars are worth. People love us. People love coming to our assemblies. It's this amazing group of really cool people. When you believe you've succeeded and you believe you're real, but you're not actually that real, that's a really dangerous situation to be in because basically when you pretend you're real in any sense, that turns into a blind spot. If you pretend you're real, you think you don't have to make yourself real. And so in retrospect, when I look to, Justin just told me we have 2,000 people watching now. That's great. And thank you all for being here. And I'm going to try to not bore you with my long ramblings. When you're in that situation of having sort of, you're kind of trying to fake until you make it really in the wrong way. And you go out and you invite people, ambitious people, wonderful people, talented people came into the system and basically started literally startups. which is like, starting a startup is a very, very stressful thing to do because you are very much default dead. People started startups to basically build apps on top of Urbit, on top of Arvo, this operating system. And what they found was basically a combination of two things. One is that the user base was very small, and the other was that the maturity of the system was just not quite there yet. And in general, these startups, these apps, these could have maybe solved one of these problems. Solving two problems this big is what's called startup squared. And so it was too soon. This is a classic Gartner hype cycle, trough of disappointment moment where people realize, wow, this sounds really great. I want it to exist, but wow, when I try to run on it, the network is too slow, the database is too slow, like this happens, ships crash, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was kind of an unsolvable problem. And so we brought a lot of people into the ecosystem with a lot of hope, and like reality proceeded to crush those people. At the same time, reality was also delivering a perfect storm in the other direction. So for example, it's like I read we had this very prominent sort of project split with this team at Urbit, as it was called. Now it's called Keynote, who came in and they tried to build a blockchain for Urbit. This other company, Holium, was trying to build a very, very ambitious user interface for Urbit. These were basically really these were really visionary people with really big plans. And I've read, the sort of complaint by the Urbit people that they posted when they're like, no, we actually can't do this. We need to do it separately. I'm a big believer in, peace, love, unity, and respect. And so I'm very pro unity. And like, basically, what I've been doing for the last week is just working on the problem of unity, because keeping this ecosystem together, and there are multiple companies, there's huge numbers of people, there are people very passionate about this system, and like, then you just have this problem of like, basically people experience like real world problems. And so you had this kind of spalling off of effort with Holium, Urbit, Plunder, basically, where everyone they didn't exactly fork, but they kind of, they split off in various directions. And these were all like, one of the things that's really neat about coming back is just seeing the level of talent involved in this system just go up and up and up and up, right? And I'm just like, oh my God. I look at I talk to the Urbit Foundation staff, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, if we'd had people of this quality, we had some people of this quality in like 2016, but if we'd had a whole team with this, oh my God, and so like, it's the most flattering thing about where Urbit is now is just the quality of amazing people that it's attracted. And so, these amazing people have come out, right? They've spun off, there's another great company, Zorp, which does Nockchain. The Zorp guys discovered that Nock, which was not originally designed for this purpose, is actually like many other microlisps, because it's not that innovative. It's basically a microlisp, is really, really good for ZK proofs. And so they discovered this, and they went off in this whole, they're still, of course, close friends of the project, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they just discovered this other application, which their Nockchain has not yet been released, but when it's released, watch out, world, right? And because that's another case of like, really the sweet spot of the Urbit idea is to do like applied research that's basically like real and grounded, and yet also like innovative. And when you're in that sweet spot, it feels so good. There's just nothing, it feels like there's nothing that can stop you. And like, I was talking to a Zorp engineer recently, and he was explaining basically the way Nockchain solved these kind of ZK problems. And, that's not really my kind of computer science, to be honest. So I understood about a third of it. But like, I was just like, it has that feeling of realness, which is just a really incredible feeling, right? And so, that feeling of realness is great. But you also have this basic problem that you're doing applied research. It's still research. And so you're sort of gating the growth of the society of decentralized identities on a decentralized, purely functional operating system, which is the thing that doesn't exist in the world, right? That no one has ever frickin' done. So, like, you have these great mountain climbers and they're out there climbing Everest. And meanwhile, the people creating the decentralized society are just like, yeah, we want to just go up to the top of that 500-foot hill over there and kind of live. And so, it was really that idea that these two things needed to be connected that was basically pulling Urbit into this sort of kind of cycle of like, thrashing in a way where it had actually gotten onto like it was doing great applied research, but like the time scale was just wrong. It couldn't sort of work that way. And so I wound up with basically the conclusion that we should develop Azimuth as if Arvo didn't exist and develop Arvo as if Azimuth didn't exist. And developing Arvo as if Azimuth doesn't exist doesn't mean we abandon this dream of creating this amazing, robust, decentralized operating system and network operating system, let me say. It just means that basically it doesn't mean we slow down. In fact, I think there's a lot of ways we can speed up. Certainly could use more resources, more volunteers, more everything. It's an amazing, amazing project to work on. And like, one of the things that actually has been most flattering here is that basically in all of this hullabaloo and these miscommunications and whatever, definitely some people felt really, really, insulted and like disrespected in ways that were totally obvious in retrospect that I just totally didn't see. And like some people, as we say on the internet, rage quit. And, the amazing thing is that the people who rage quit weren't like, okay, I'm going to go work for an AI company. Like, not that no one has ever quit this project and gone to work for an AI company, but basically they're all like, I'm going to quit and be an open source developer. Which really tells you, especially for people who've been working on this for years, should be by all like rights and purposes burned out. And they're just like, Curtis, I hate you for what you did. This was a really fucked up thing to do. Like, how could you do a coup like this? This goes against the whole spirit of collective governance. And I want to keep working on this system. And that's really moving to me. And so like sort of bringing that unity and energy back in while like, acknowledging that like, this system it's really hard to build a system with a decentralized operating system with this level of maturity and make it succeed is really hard. This brings me to Tlon for a moment, because Tlon, of course, is, they have a new, and I haven't seen it yet, but I hear very good things from people who have seen it. They have basically a new user experience that is just ready to be released on top of Arvo, and it's supposedly really cool. And this is basically the Tlon strategy for bringing in more users, is just to make better and more beautiful tools for essentially having a network of private conversations that are hosted instead of the client-only unhosted thing that you see with like Signal and Telegram. And the client-only thing definitely creates a lot of, compromises in the user experience. And those are very good products, but you sort of don't know the compromises until you've seen something that actually has a server there. And so it's like basically when I look at the relationship between the Urbit Foundation and Tlon going forward, it sort of reminds me in a way of like the relationship, or what is the right relationship there, because the Urbit Foundation was spun out of Tlon, and Josh, the former ED, and many of the employees were former Tlon employees. And so in a way, by having this kind of fucked up Game of Thrones experience, which I hope this project I hope to never repeat in my life. I mean, when this was going down on like Thursday and Friday, I couldn't even eat, and it's partly that I'm training for the Ozempics, but I couldn't eat, right? And the like so stressful, and like for the people who were told that they were like losing their jobs and the project was blowing up, basically the information went around that I was here I would say, let me hit the most caricatured version of this, that I was basically killing Arvo and I was just going to do a shitcoin instead. And I'm like, oh my God, that is the worst thing in the world, right? I'm here to save all of this, and definitely there will be no shitcoining. And so that experience, caused again a lot of miscommunication, a lot of dissent, a lot of ugly energy, and the most important thing for me is just keeping that long-term project running in the sort of steady and professional and solid and yet creative and exciting way that it basically takes to create the next decentralized operating system that everyone in the world will use. And, with all due respect to, Akbar, for example, became a company called Keynote that is basically doing a Rust WASM-based decentralized operating system for the same purposes, but done doing a totally different technology. I'm like, I love that you're validating the need for this, but I think you have a lot of catching up to do. But hey, let the best OS win. Our goal is to have, even in a world where Urbit fails and Keynote or some other competitor beats it, at least the world will have a decentralized operating system, and we won't be in this position of being digital serfs on somebody's goddamn plantation, right? Because it's just ridiculous. So, getting to that future of decentralized computing is really important. It's a really important vision. We're not killing it. It is not going away. We are doing everything possible to save it, but it is a long, slow, open source, deliberative, process of hardening. It looks sort of like Linux development. Supported by all the contributions, financial or otherwise, that can be made. It's a long, slow project. The project of basically making Urbit the decentralized identity system, the decentralized society that everyone wants to be a part of, cannot wait, because it is already succeeding. And, there's a great military aphorism that says, don't reinforce failure, reinforce success. When I see failure, I see basically the thing that failed is the idea that we can grow the society by doing applied computer science research on a Silicon Valley startup schedule. And I'm just like, no. It's like one of the funny facts about the history of Urbit and Plon is that Urbit, when it was very young, actually got into Y Combinator, the most prestigious year, and I was sort of ticked off by the low, quality of technical due diligence in my 10-minute interview. And we decided, after we got into Y Combinator, we decided not to go. We turned them down, which nobody does, which is stupid in a way. But I'm just like, look, Y Combinator is for things that grow at 7% a week. You can't grow a decentralized operating system at 7% a week. What are you even talking about? This is crazy. And it's just a mismatch. Now I guess YC has nuclear power companies or something. So I don't know how they maybe they've expanded their definition of success. I don't know, great program, but it was just the intuition was this was wrong for us. Because it's actually really hard. When I came out, I was like, oh, I want to build a decentralized operating system. I'm like, well, this could be done in academia. It could be done as an open source project, or it could be done as a startup. And I was like, all three of these things are really hard. They are really a mismatch. And I wound up using the startup form. It was indeed a mismatch. And as we spent many years basically being a startup that hadn't failed or hadn't succeeded anywhere, I could look at what these VCs thought of us. And actually, if you know the venture capital world, one thing that you might not know is that one of the things they really hate is companies that haven't succeeded but won't have the decency to just go out of business. They hate these zombie companies, right? And we were a zombie company for a long time. And that really sucks. This was before sort of the crypto boom made kind of people see this kind of argument for this address space of limited size, which reminded people of crypto. And of course, we became a crypto project when we moved these contracts onto Ethereum, which was actually very controversial internally at the time, believe it or not. And so you have that as sort of the right course of development for Arvo, whether it's an open source project or whether there are sort of financial sources of funding that can be found for it. I believe is a totally open source project. You know, it's going to succeed no matter what, with the level of commitment that we've seen to it, where like even the people who rage quit, like keep working on the project without pay, right? You know, like you don't see that when a normal startup fails, right? Not that we failed, but like, you know, you don't see that level of loyalty, and it's that level of loyalty and like the spirit of togetherness that makes things succeed, even in like the stormiest of stormy weather. And this has been some pretty stormy weather. And like, guys, you know, why would you rage quit? Well, why would you rage quit? Why would you rage quit? Is you come into the office thinking, okay, things are a little troubled, you know, and then your boss tells you he just got fired, and if I hadn't gotten fired, I would have laid you all off on Monday. And like, you're just like, what the hell, right? And that was the situation in which these people found themselves in. Furthermore, they'd been working in a project that had been run in a very collegial, open source like way, and suddenly here's this like backroom coup that comes in and like, you know, hits them from out of nowhere. Who are these board members? Who are these people? Why is Curtis coming back? Is he going to turn this into some kind of like political like gab type project, right? What the heck is going on here? This is all hosed. Why is he blowing everything up? Completely logical way to think, right? And completely logical way to think. And like, you know, I just like, you know, again, the level of passion here like blows me away. On the other hand, it's really important to get out of this mindset of like, we're going to do applied operating systems research in order to, you know, develop exponential 7% a week user growth within 6 months. That just doesn't happen. It just doesn't work, right? And the thing is, that loop of like doing OS development in order to drive user growth in the decentralized identity, that's the thing that failed, and we don't reinforce failure, we reinforce success. What succeeded? What succeeded was creating this amazing society of a high quality people who like see the future, you know, because everyone, you know, Urbit is still small enough is that everyone in it is almost, it's like someone who saw this future. Like, if you're in Urbit now, there wasn't an authority figure that told you to be here. The New York Times did not tell you, oh, you know, use this cool new thing, Urbit. You're here because, in a way, you invented it yourself. In order to see the potential of this and believe in it, you had to think. And like, you're here because you thought, and you're a thoughtful, interesting person who can think for yourself. And you may not be at Harvard, or you may be at Harvard. Apologies to Topher, our executive director. He is a Harvard graduate. In case you haven't met Topher, he sort of looks like Matt Damon from Good Will Hunting, except and acts like Matt Damon from Good Will Hunting, except his ancestors have actually been going to Harvard for, I think he's like, my first ancestor was expelled from Harvard in 1706 or something like that. So not to knock Harvard, but the thing is, you know, I don't know that Harvard is really a center of people who think for themselves. And Urbit is very much a center of people who think for themselves. And like, I think some people are like, you know, oh, you know, Urbit is just the cult of Curtis Yarvin, cult of personality, neo reaction, whatever. I don't give a fuck about that stuff, right? You know, and like the not here anyway, and so what it is this incredible community of independent-minded, amazing people. And remember what I said about growing a society. A society grows if people want to join a society of people who are as cool as them or cooler. People do not want to join a society that is less cool than them. And, you know, with all respect to the crypto ecosystem, which I love, which is an amazing thing, when people came to Urbit Assembly, they noticed that it was not like an ordinary crypto conference, that it was cool. and that it was full of cool people. And some of that is due to the nature of the project. Some of that is due to Galen Wolf-Pauli's incredible design sensibilities, and incredible just management, honestly, of this stuff, because he is an incredible kind of social manager as well. And I was just like, this is the success. This needs to be reinforced. And instead, it's basically falling, to the wayside due to like technical blockers, and like, the technology just can't keep up with it. It's not, there's too much stuff that's too prototypey, that's too experimental, that's not ready for prime time, that we shipped as though it was ready for prime time. I mean, I don't know where to find like the Akbar keynote criticisms of Urbit that's out there somewhere on the internet. I don't agree with what they did with that, but I agree with most of the criticisms, right? And so, that's basically the, so what does it mean to push the society forward? Let's get down to brass tacks in terms of what it needs to push the society forward. What it means is basically driving value into the world, driving utility into the world of azimuth names. It means taking this namespace, and a namespace and a society are the same thing. It's a society of identities. And there were many, many obvious things that basically we can do that are very low hanging fruit that can be done. So let me give two examples of this. One of them is the obvious example of gating, Urbit names, which are already on Ethereum, although there's a problem with this naive rollup, a lot of stuff that needs to be fixed, gating them to ENS. Ethereum name system, which is kind of caught on a little bit with this very, very cool project, for example, named Farcaster. And, Farcaster is less ambitious than Urbit in many ways. And when I see things that are less ambitious than Urbit catching on, I'm not super worried, because the more technically ambitious thing can always very easily embrace and extend them, Microsoft style. So if you're an operating system and you're competing with an app, basically once the operating system sort of can replicate the app, there's no danger of competition. So I'm like, well, you should be able to use Urbit names in Farcaster, right? But you can't. Why is that? It's because nobody's done the work. Similarly, basically, when I look at this decentralized, system of decentralized identities, I'm like, wow, I have this decentralized identity. Anywhere I do login with Google, I should be able to do login with Urbit, right? I should be able to build Web 2 systems which use Urbit identities completely seamlessly. And then I have the principle that basically I'm like, wherever I go as my Urbit name, wherever I go as Sorg Namtive is Urbit. Even if it's written on totally banal 20th century technologies, that is Urbit. And if you build things that have decentralized identities and centralized backends, shitty old centralized backends, then basically as the decentralized technology catches up and as you actually need it, you can sort of smoothly scale. You really can't fake it till you make it. You can kind of smoothly scale from that captive decentralized backend to I have my own node and nobody can interfere with me. And making that, liberating us to develop in that way basically makes app development, whether it's the UF building these application experiences, UF Urbit Foundation building these application experiences, or third parties building these experiences. Basically, you're going to go to urbit.org, you're going to type in your ship and master ticket. One of the things Urbit is actually, I think we're, just because of the way we do key generation, we're actually the best Bitcoin brain wallet out there, or the best crypto brain wallet out there if you do it right, solely because instead of remembering this list of 20 words, you only have to remember a 16 syllable, like 64-bit key. It's just as secure. Maybe it's slightly less secure, but it's slightly less secure in that, it's still as secure as Fort Knox. It's just not as secure as God, right? And making these kinds of sort of usability versus security trade-offs where you still have enough security, but you get a little more usability, that's a just crucial thing to do in the design of real systems for real people. And so I'm just like, there are all of these things that we can do that don't need Arvo. And if we do all of the things that don't need Arvo, and my own current favorite pet project, this is very, futuristic. I don't know that we're going to do this. I don't know who's going to do this. I actually can say this about all of these plans, including the updates to the azimuth contracts that I'm going to talk about next. You're basically like, you're just like, if you are able to do these things directly with this identity space, you can really serve the growth of this much better. The project that I want to do is basically, again, totally preliminary here. I want to recreate the incredible experience I had on the first ever decentralized social network, which was Usenet in the late 80s and early 90s, the golden age of Usenet before Eternal September, as they call it. They're huge. It's a very different world. Much has changed. You can't just rebuild. You can't do it, and if they build it, they will come kind of approach. But the idea of basically, why do you get an Urbit planet? You get an Urbit planet because here's this pool of content that you can see only if you're on Urbit, because I strongly believe that basically Urbit content should only be visible on Urbit. It's a very anti-internet-y kind of way of thinking, but if you notice, all of these big walled gardens have, adopted that kind of thinking, and there's a reason for it. And if there's a world of like, you step inside of Urbit, you get your planet, you're in Urbit, and there's this world of like really high quality conversations among really high quality people, and it's a public space. It's different from the thing. We're not competing with Tlon, because Tlon is doing private spaces like Telegram or Signal. If we build a public community based on this really, really high quality society, the content in this, we curate extremely high quality content there. It's only visible if you have an Urbit. You are not allowed to train your AI on it. And except that, again, inside Urbit, AI has changed the world in a lot of ways. If you have a pool of high quality content that other people are not allowed to train their AIs on, but you can train your AI on it, Urbit will also have the best and smartest AI, because this AI, you can train an AI on Reddit. Reddit is full of garbage, right? And so getting this high quality space is something that is just going to suck people in if it can be done right. And I don't know if we'll do it, someone else does it, but that's an example of a kind of thing where basically you can go hard on building that on Azimuth with just decentralized identities today. You can build something that basically fakes being a decentralized social network like Usenet, and as the operating system catches up, it becomes a decentralized social network like Usenet. And that's basically that plan for success is one that I kind of find a lot more reasonable than the sort of the default one that we're operating on. And I hope people will take me seriously in kind of moving Arvo to like a different timeline, and trust that I'm not killing Arvo, which I spent literally 10 years of my life working on. And so this thing like Curtis is coming and killing Arvo was very, very disturbing to me, right? Because it's like I'm murdering my own child or something. And that's not happening. Arvo, I couldn't kill Arvo. No one could kill Arvo. It's alive, right? It's alive because people love it and they love building it and they love working on it. And as a research project, actually, Arvo doesn't just work as a research project in terms of bringing people in the future. Actually, what this research project does is it brings in amazing people who want to work on it. And these amazing people are not just worth a lot as coders. They're amazing people in a lot of ways. And so a lot of the value of this is just their amazingness. And they like, you know, they sort of have this aura of just like, wow, you're coming into this community of amazing people. And then you're talking about, you know, like growing citrus trees with them. But you know what? They're amazing people. And so, you know, their discussion of citrus trees is going to be actually a lot better than Reddit's. Because the quality of a network can only decline, and like Reddit's quality has declined a lot. Reddit used to be as good as Hacker News. Reddit was a really high quality community once. I know you laugh at me for this. You know, you can laugh at me for this as well. I met my first wife on Craigslist when it was cool. And you know, so Craigslist was actually a cool thing once. I know you're laughing at me for how old I was, for how old I am, but it's true. And so, you know, essentially creating that air of basically Urbit is the cool network of cool people, and like people come in because their cool friends are into it, and kind of the ethos of it is that it doesn't advertise, it doesn't, you know, broadcast, oh, everybody needs to be on Urbit. You know what? Everybody will be on Urbit eventually, but for now, let's get the cool people first. And like, you know, the experience of the society, some people are like, well, that's kind of elitist of you, Curtis, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, it is, because that's reality. And so that strategy of growing Urbit, of growing Arvo, basically through growing Azimuth in like every way that we can, giving people these identities, making sure they bond to them, creating societies of just like awesome people whose content everybody wants to consume, building public spaces, building a society, building, if you're a Balaji Srinivasan fan, really a network state is really kind of essential. And like, if you look at kind of take the network state view of what's happened here, people are like, ooh, it's a coup. I would say, first of all, that this is kind of the first instance, anything but a coup, because basically this is the governance system that we designed actually working. It's actually doing its thing. And basically we designed the Urbit Foundation long ago. The Urbit Foundation while I was at Tlon was just a theoretical list of like, oh, this should be a thing at some point. It was created in reality. It was done right. It was given a structure that worked. The board was basically created not as a mechanism to micromanage the Urbit Foundation, but it's not corporate governance, it's corporate accountability. And basically the corporate accountability mechanism, thanks to our lovely, amazing, and wonderful board members, Will and Ryan and Brian, decided that a new direction was needed, and we chose that new direction. And so choosing that new direction basically means, again, I hope you understand now what I mean when I say that the purpose of the Urbit Foundation is to grow Urbit in every sense, in the long, medium, and short term. And so the long term is essentially, vision is completely unchanged. It's decentralized identity, decentralized computing, and also confidential computing, right? And the combination of these things basically is the digital nirvana that we all want to live in. It's not easy. We're not there yet. We're working very hard on it, and it's going really in the right direction, especially with a set of technical projects called, New Urbit, which are at exactly the right level of like technical ambitiousness for the long-term future. More work needs to be done on near-term maintenance, and especially it's really important for Talon, which is our flagship application, to see actually, can we deliver user growth on Arvo? Can we build out this system? Can we experience, if we have a good enough UI, can we experience this kind of explosion of users with the decentralized computing that we have now? And my answer is maybe. I don't know about the scalability of Arvo. I don't know about the robustness of Arvo. I don't know how much that's going to hold Tlon back. Like, we need to put our heads together and make sure that the answer is as little as possible. But basically, I don't want to bet a 20-year project on that system software working well enough that basically that's a real that's a real test of the quality of Talon's product. My fear, and I could be wrong, I don't know the system well enough. My fear is that Talon is still going to be handicapped by the limited maturity of Arvo, however hard we work. And I have no evidence for this at all. I just worry. And I hope I'm wrong, and I could be wrong, right? But the thing is, basically, whatever it is, the reality is that building apps with a centralized backend is always going to be easier. We know all of the problems of centralized backends, and yet basically building that society out with that technology is just like, it's going to be hard, and we can't bet the future of the project on it. And we're now in a period in basically crypto world where, and I think this is very good, like basically the results of these troughs of these cycles, in the bottom of the cycle, you get judged with extreme harshness and realism. And that sense of being judged with extreme harshness and realism is really, really important, because without that, you decide your default alive, you fly straight and level, right? And that's not going to work for us anymore. Like, we can't survive on hype. We can't build a new world that's entirely made of hype. Like, we have to do better than that. And that's why we're pursuing this azimuth strategy of building centralized backends for decentralized identity, in concert with not trying to lose the Talon strategy of let's go straight to the end game. And so, that feels a little complicated. It feels like these two entities are competing. They're really not. And they're, if nothing else, they are joined at the hip by the need to take this thing and make it more robust and more reliable and more scalable, which is also a significant part of the kind of the neo-Urbit work. But just, that's implies, maturity work is the hardest work in some ways, because people don't want to do it. They want to do the sexy things. And the people who are amazing talents who want to do the unsexy things are the rarest and most wonderful people in the world. And we do have some. And so that's kind of, I think that's given, I hope, a better picture of the strategy going forward. And the last detail about this is essentially how you fix the essentially broken address space market. And the broken address space market is essentially broken for, I would say, a very simple reason, which is that when I designed this system, I did not know anything about tokenomics or any of these things. It was actually designed pre-crypto. And so I kind of made the mistake of basically there's something that everyone who hosts a party knows, which is that the party always starts in the kitchen. In other words, when you've got a small number of people, when you have just the early adopters, you need to kind of concentrate their energy as much as possible. And of course, one of the analogies that I use for settling kind of this unknown new continent of Urbit is the settling of North America. Actually, there are about as many Urbit planets, I think it's off by like a factor of 2, as there are acres of land in North America. But the thing is, if you try to, let's say you're settling North America in 1624, it's the Bering Strait land bridge never happens, so there's no indigenous people, there's just all of this land. But what are you going to do with an acre in the middle of Colorado? Kind of nothing. And so the situation there is that you want the whole principle of like the confined limited address space is not a very powerful or effective limit when you have thousands of users and billions of acres of land in North America. And so what's really important is to basically modify that so a couple of things are possible. One, a problem with the way it was designed, again, not a very blockchain native kind of design, is that you can't even get a planet on chain, which kind of really, like, which really, like, if you have to go through a centralized process to get an identity, like, is it really even a decentralized identity at all? Maybe not really. Like, arguably, it's wrong. And so basically, to put along, to simplify a relatively complicated plan. And I want to say, by the way, that this is not a finalized plan. And so what's really important in sort of maintaining unity here is that basically before, and this is unavoidable, we're trying to operate fast, but it's sort of like maintaining the unity of the project is the most important thing. It is absolutely the most important thing. And that involves politics, that involves democracy, that involves bringing people together, that involves like showing the love, that involves basically me and the board saying, and I'll take full sort of credit for all the failures here. I think the board has already apologized. That involves saying, wow, we caused a huge shitstorm here. We ruffled a lot of people's feelings. We screwed up a lot of things. And so for basically me to say right now, of my own, like, I'm the new dictator of Urbit. This is the plan. We must go forward. No, that's not the way things are going to work. It's not the way things can work. And so there's actually a lot of reaching out and consulting and smoothing over of like ruffled feathers and like apologies for hurting people's feelings and like damaging things that needs to be done. That's a hugely important process. And like basically, again, like I'm as conscious of anyone of the shit we screwed up. And so for me to say this plan is final is absolutely wrong, right? But, nonetheless, here is basically my plan for fixing this, which is we are going to replace as the sort of default scarcity level of the force scarcity construct in Urbit, we are going to say, instead of getting a planet directly from a star, in order to get onto Urbit, you buy another token, which is a visa, which is basically a fungible utility token. And then you go to the contract and you say, here, I have a visa. I would like to trade my visa for a planet. And that gives various hosting services the ability to offer you a planet based on a star they have active, or if nobody offers you a free planet, the system itself will give you a free planet on one of the sort of stars that were turned in to issue these visas. So essentially, if you're a star holder now, you hold a Virgin star, the contracts are updated. Formerly, your star was useful because it could issue 65 535 planets, each of which was different. Now what's going to happen is you're going to turn in your star to the contract, and it's going to give you 65 535 visa tokens. So almost the same thing, same asset. There's no sort of sense of like different assets kind of pulling in different directions and creating a different thing. The sort of, competing proposal was something called Zenith, which involved doing a Cosmos-based blockchain with a new token that would then be airdropped to existing holders. And like, okay, you're airdropping it to star holders, but it's like airdropping Bitcoin Cash to Bitcoin holders. You've still created this kind of forkish tension. Really important to avoid that. Really important to avoid any hint of, okay, we have this cool brand name, Urbit, so we're just going to do a meme coin that uses the brand that we're going to pump and dump. Pumping and dumping is not like part of our lexicon here, right? And we're creating utility tokens we're making them useful, and we're making them work. The difference, the one thing that sort of changes the dynamics, and I guess I'll leave people to think hard about how this changes the market dynamics, is that a star gets 65 535 visas to issue, but the visas do not all activate at once. So out of those 65 535 visas, 5% of those visas are live when the contract is uploaded, and then there's another 10% that activate after 1 year, 10% that activate over 2 years, 25% after 5, 50% after 10. And each of these delayed tokens that activates only later in time actually is its own utility token. And so it's not a lockup per se, because a lockup is this sort of brittle thing that can't be given to other people. No, these are just, long-term Urbit tokens that turn into short-term Urbit tokens. If you believe in the project, you basically know that it's a 10-year project anyway, so why not hold the long-term ones? And basically what's neat is that basically when we look at, the people who are willing to hold long-term tokens, we can identify these as the people who have what they call in the crypto world diamond hands. And the thing is, the real strength of a project is that core of long-term belief. And this basically creates a way that everybody with diamond hands can see how many other people have diamond hands and basically believe in this system as the future. And I think that essentially solves the problem of having this kind of broken market that doesn't really clear. Will it work? I don't know. We'll see. I'm open to many different options. When I was basically like, let me give my opinion on the question of should Urbit have its own blockchain, really briefly, because that's been a source of contention. And when you say, should Urbit have its own blockchain, what you really mean is, does Urbit have its own pool of global state? Of course it has its own pool of global state. That's azimuth. That's the set of, who owns what name on the blockchain. Of course, we're using Ethereum now. Actually, we're using Ethereum plus a naive rollup because the rent is too damn high, to be frank, on Ethereum. Hey, Ethereum, if you're listening, the rent is too damn high. There's a number of ways to fix the rent is too damn high problem. Someone, I forget their name, made me aware of an issue, which is that one of the reasons why the azimuth contracts are so expensive is that they're kind of maintaining indexes on the blockchain. So they're doing things that really could be done by blockchain clients at runtime, and that is driving gas costs up. Another possibility is moving to a stronger optimistic roll-up structure, such as Optimism or Coinbase Base. We're certainly looking into that. And a third possibility is having our own chain. And, that was sort of a competing proposal within the system. Let me, sort of explain, because it was sort of pivotal in this little Game of Thrones, experience, this conflict. Let me sort of explore the reasons why we didn't want to do a Cosmos chain. It's because I'm not really confident in the kind of multi-blockchain vision of the future that was very popular in 2020 or 2021. I'm not sure the inter-blockchain communication vision is really entirely successful. And furthermore, when I basically look at Cosmos, essentially Cosmos is this very advanced, mature project. And when you're running a Cosmos blockchain, you're running in the Cosmos SDK, which is on 100,000 lines of C++ code or something. Apologize if I'm exaggerating that. And pulling that into Urbit into Arvo is very hard. We don't run C++. And so you've kind of got this thing that's almost, it's like a bag on the side of Arvo. Maybe it's not even connected to Arvo. That felt really wrong to me. And then the other thing is sort of, you're like, okay, this idea of doing a new token obviously has this kind of economic model in it. And, the economic model of like, why are people buying this new token? Well, economically, the price they pay will be made up by like blockchain fees. And it's like, okay, when I looked at sort of the success, the idea that this chain was going to like succeed and become real, I'm like, in order to succeed and become real, okay, you need Urbit to become a successful social network. Then you need it to become a commercial network so that people are making blockchain like transactions, like paying for content or, registering known content on the blockchain. There's a number of really good ideas for that. And it's just sort of, to be concrete, it's really a little bit far off, because one of the things when you're doing really good applied system software research is you only want to solve problems. I sort of adopted a rule where I needed to see a problem 3 times before I tried to solve it, because if I didn't see 3 kind of cases of uses of a system, I knew that I couldn't really design a generalized system in that way. And so then you're like, okay, this needs to succeed as a social network. It needs to succeed as a social network with economic structure. And then people have to use basically essentially a high fee blockchain on this. And, one of the funny things, being a kind of amateurish or amateur history buff, the thing that basically blockchain fees remind me of more than anything, little detail of American history that some of you may or may not know, is the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act was actually the original rent is too damn high blockchain fees thing, because what the Stamp Act said was that if you had to do any legal transaction, you had to use the special stamp paper that was supplied only by the British government. And you had to pay the blockchain fee, almost literally. It's like almost the same thing. And I'm like, okay, maybe Urbit needs a chain that isn't its own. I can see that. Maybe, but like maybe it needs a chain, and the chain will be used for purposes that we don't really understand. So how can we, design it now? I'm like, when I look at Urbit's kind of structure with 256 galaxies, 65,000 stars, 4 billion planets, it has this kind of hierarchical pyramid shape, which is intended to make kind of fan out, kind of various kinds of not perfectly decentralized, semi-decentralized things work really well. One of the ways that you can imagine that working really well is to use the Urbit galaxies as kind of a mix between proof of stake and proof of authority to do validation. This was actually part of the Zenith proposal, again, using Cosmos. And I'm like, yes, I can see building a BFT, business default tolerance chain based on the galaxies, but like, I might try to go for 0 fees in that. I might try to go for like really low fees, because actually that structure is adapted to such a way where maybe the fees can be 0 and you just like have some kind of denial of service prevention to avoid spamming it. Furthermore, there's another chain under development from friends of ours that I, referred to, recently, Notchain, which is that's a proof of work chain, actually, a very advanced, interesting ZK proof chain. Maybe that's the right thing. I don't know. I haven't seen it. Hasn't shipped. Sounds cool, right? And so I'm basically like making this sort of commitment in a way, basically because frankly the address space market is broken, and the easy solution to that is let's have a new token, let's do a launch, let's do an not ICO, but like whatever. I'm just like, let's actually fix the fundamental problem here. Maybe we can do a chain later. It could be a Cosmos chain. It could be a BFT chain that doesn't use Cosmos. It could be Notchain from Zorp. It could be many, many different things. And it's just like, technically as an architect, I don't like being pushed into making that decision by economic structures, and it feels like we could be going down really the wrong path entirely, especially with different assets pulling in different directions, because sort of every asset is an incentive. And so I was like, to the people who imagine us like needing a chain, the other thing I didn't mention, when it comes to the need for a chain, is that when you have this vision of confidential computing using these secure enclaves, there's this other incredible thing you can do with secure enclaves, which is called remote attestation, which basically allows you, when you're talking over a network, this seems like magic, but it really isn't. You're talking over a network, and you're basically can be assured that you're talking to a genuine Urbit server running a genuine app on the other side, and that can be cryptographically proven to you. Never mind how. I know it sounds like magic. It's not. It works, right? And so that allows you, let's say you're trying to do in Urbit, you're trying to do something like Signal with auto-deleting messages. The analog hole is always open. You can always take a screenshot of your messages, but you can actually prove that you're not talking to a rogue client that just says it's going to delete the messages and then like archives them to be delivered to the New York Times, right? And I mean, I always write messages as if I was talking directly to the New York Times, but as everyone should. But like, still, there's a case for features like that. And when you're doing that, that allows you to do solves a lot of the same kinds of integrity problems that blockchain solve. And so I'm like, maybe this is a reason we don't really need a chain, right? And actually, Signal, I think in their Signal uses this internally in their servers. Signal is amazing technology, by the way. I take my hat off to Signal. And so there's a lot of different ways to sort of proceed in this direction. And this decision to sort of go with this one choice seemed like sort of part of the general pattern of constraining the long-term architectural integrity of Arvo and of Urbit to basically short-term needs in a way that was kind of like panicked, I would say, in a little bit. Because when you're doing this kind of default alive thing and you're flying the plane steady and level, and then you're just like, holy shit, we're like 500 feet from a mountain in front of us, you tend to panic. And I was just like, what I sensed when I came back in to like offer a little bit of technical and strategic advice was I sensed like a lot of chaos and fear and panic, and this is why I sort of regret using the phrase a wartime CEO when I talked to CoinDesk, because it sounded very warlike, which is actually not where I want to go with this at all. It doesn't mean we should have a civil war and that's great and I'm going to crush my enemies and see them driven before me, right? It's like the only crushing I want to do is like crushing with love, right? It's like because actually I haven't, in all of this conflict, like I haven't found any really unpleasant people or evil people. Like there's no darkness in this project. There's really no darkness here. And that's the most amazing thing, is basically this kind of lack of darkness, just the sweetness of this whole community has just like, I knew it was like this, but I didn't know it was this much like this. It's just incredible to me. Like, and I'm like, I know we can make this work. And so like, I'm basically like, there's so many ways to basically hold this thing together. And there's so many ways to kind of put Urbit as a society on track towards succeeding in the future. And there are so many ways to keep this operating system on track. And it's actually in a really good place, right? The fact that this like operating system that works on just these totally alien principles, you just boot it up and it runs and it's just like a normal thing, and it's like a single level store, and there isn't really a separation between like files and memory even in it. It's like when you use your iPhone, for example, the iPhone tries really, really hard to pretend to be a single level store in which all apps are on all the time. It works really hard at that, and yet it is still running an operating system designed for mini computers in the 1970s, in which there are two kinds of storage: fast transient storage and slow persistent storage. And your app shut off, and you can actually tell when your app and the iPhone has been shut off. And like the fact that we don't have that problem and yet we have something that works, is just like, it's amazing. It's a miracle. And like the amount of people who've poured so much energy into Arvo, whether working on it or building things on top of it or going to Hoon school and learning Hoon, this like crazy language that I designed that doesn't look like any other programming language you've ever seen, right? People love it or hate it. Some people hate it, but a lot of people seem to love it. And like, that's just miraculous to me. And I know that we're going to keep it going, and I know we're going to make it. I guess I can't say make it great again, but there's one other thing that I want to cover, and then I'm going to take questions. And the one other thing, again, I covered this on my Twitter thread, and people are like, "Oh, here's this guy. He has this political reputation." People sort of people kind of love to try to, for whatever reason, like exaggerate my importance and my like relevance. And in 2016 there was a story that went around. I was still working on Urbit, I wasn't blogging at the time, and the story went around. It was published in the Atlantic Monthly, which dates to like the 19th century, like the middle of the 19th century. And this august, revered mouthpiece of American letters reports that I am the secret mastermind behind the secret mastermind behind Donald Trump. That was about as welcome as receiving a box of shit in the mail, right? And it was completely untrue. Actually, I had never met Steve Bannon before in my life. And now sort of the story is going around that I'm like the secret mastermind behind JD Vance. Yes, it's slightly true. I have met JD Vance. That's about as far as it goes, right? And so like there's this whole idea that like Curtis is coming in here and he's supporting the society, but he wants to turn the society into like this like cult of like weird monarchist ideas. Like, I'm not comfortable with that. Like, what is he? And there's sort of all this stuff going around, and it's like, obviously it's a decentralized society. And so in a decentralized society, you can't control who's part of that society. And that's part of the fun. And also not everybody has to be in the same room together. That's also part of the fun. But, as a decentralized society, it's still a society. And it's still a society that sort of has a default culture. And like, actually, it's sort of possible to steer that default culture, and the default culture it also has a life of its own. And what I see from when I look at this, the sort of the default culture of Urbit as it was, and especially the culture that we had back in the earliest days at Tlon, just working for Galen and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is the right culture. And I spent, I wrote a bunch of like drafts trying to define this culture. And then I was like, it doesn't really matter because everybody knows it anyway. And the culture was essentially one in which what was really important, I hate to use this phrase because it's a piece of jargon and I'm very against jargon, but I'm using it in a somewhat ironic space. The really important thing was that basically, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, that Urbit should feel like a safe space for everyone. Oh my God, it's really disturbing. But I mean it in the literal sense of the term. I mean that everyone should feel safe in this context, and everyone should not feel like they're part of some kind of political war zone. And watching the world turn into a war zone personally at people's jobs or whatever has just been like the most upsetting thing about watching 30 years of history go by. Because basically there was a thing that Coinbase and I guess 37 Signals did recently, which is that a few years ago, they announced that basically their companies would be mission oriented rather than you bring your whole self to work, which meant that some people brought their whole selves to work and then they brought their whole selves to work and like terrified everybody else in the office. To be frank, just like nobody can be terrified here. And when I see these spaces where basically nobody is terrified in any way, it's so magical and it's so wonderful. And it's just obviously the right place to go. And what do you have to do in order to create that magical feeling of like universal safety? You basically have to have a culture where essentially nobody uses political weapons. Nobody uses loaded language. You can't cancel anyone because you can't even use the words that you would have to cancel someone. Because to do a cancellation, think about what you would say. Okay, you're not the kind of person that does this because you're here. Think about what you would say in order to do that. And you'll notice that all of your words there are full of jargon. They're full of, loaded and coded language. If you haven't read George Orwell's classic essay, Politics in the English Language, everyone should read that, just as everyone should read 1984. I don't care what your ideology, your culture, your religion is, like, that's a universal thing. And so when you basically have this principle of, like, you speak clearly and straightly and collectively, and you're not preaching and you're not browbeating and you're not even trolling. I'm very anti-trolling, right? And maybe on Twitter, great, troll on Twitter, X, troll on X, but like here, that's not cool. It's not the vibe, man. Because the thing is, there's two kinds of loaded language. There's a kind of loaded language that has power on its side, that is hegemonic, if I may use the language of power ironically. There is hegemonic loaded language, and that makes everyone feel unsafe because it's like bringing power into this. It's like bringing your gun into a saloon in the Old West. You're like, okay, you're not pointing that thing at me, but you're waving it around. It makes me feel a little unsafe, like I don't like to feel unsafe. I don't want to feel unsafe. Stop waving that thing around. And then there's the other kind of loaded language and loaded politics, which is the anti-hegemonic discourse, where you're basically like kind of pointedly defying authority. You're defying, the powers that be. You're just like, I'm not allowed to use that word, so I need to use that word every 17 times I speak, right? And when you're doing that, you're also endangering everyone around you. You're basically saying, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to basically incur the hostility of the powers that be. And that hostility is going to come down to all of us in this circle. And I'm just endangering everybody around me because I'm a crazy radical person who likes to do dangerous stuff. Also not cool. So it's a decentralized world. It's a decentralized society. I can't impose these rules on everybody or anybody. I'm not in charge of that. I can inspire people to basically create this kind of vibe. It's basically the same kind of vibe as essentially, you'll notice that basically what's called teapot on Twitter. I don't even know what that means. I don't think teapot exists. Or it's like there used to be this thing called Dime Square in New York. Doesn't exist anymore. It's all over. Don't find Dime Square. It doesn't exist. But like the vibe carries on, right? The vibe is everything. And that vibe of like genuinely safe spaces, that's the vibe that and I think everyone else who's in this kind of wants to see on Urbit and in Urbit communities. And I'm really, really dedicated to the vibe. So the idea that basically I'm here to turn this into Gab or something, which is a very low quality network, or even that I'm here to turn this the opposite, is turning it into Blue Sky. Blue Sky is a great project. Like if you look at what they're doing technically, it's really, really, really good. And yet basically it's sort of been overrun by a certain kind of like political intensity, which is very common to a lot of really, really, really good people. The quality level in a certain sense on Blue Sky is really high. It is not a safe space. And so I don't want to be that either. And actually, when I talk about growing this society, it's growing this culture, it's growing this ethos. And, Urbit is designed to be universal. It's designed to be the system that everyone uses. It's designed to completely contain the future. And it has to have a culture that can completely contain the future. And that's the culture I believe in. All right. I've ranted at you for roughly 2 hours. That's enough time to basically move over to Urbit Radio and start taking questions from the wonderful Urbit people. I hope we haven't crashed the network, but, let's have a look. And we'll see what's going there. Justin, how was that?
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you, Curtis. That was really tremendous talk, honestly. You covered a lot of ground.
Excellent.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground.
Excellent. All right. I'm going to go over into the chat and I'm going to prove that I'm real.
We're staying here. And I've collated the questions for you.
That I'm here by sending a message from my wonderfully thank you to Red Horizon for hosting us. Here I am, and I am going to post on Urbit, and it's going to say, hello, world. Now, is that you? Hello world. I hit send. Did I hit send? Did it go anywhere? Things are really slow, but I said hello world. Why don't I, yeah, things are a little slow. Life in the big city.
That's all right. Radio has held
All
up
right,
quite
and
well.
Justin, you've got questions,
Yes.
and you've been collecting the questions, you've been curating the questions, and I'm going to go back to you and hear those questions. Thank you for moderating.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're going to stay here just so everyone knows we're going to keep broadcasting, but the questions are being selected just from the Urbit community. So
yeah, you
all right.
can feel free to shitpost on the, well, don't shitpost because we don't do that, but feel free to chat on the YouTube chat. But you know, the questions are coming from Urbit because Urbit is better. Sorry.
All right. So here we go. And by the way, I thought that was really great. Curtis's tremendous and comprehensive kind of statement. I think it clarified a lot of things for a lot of people. So thank you for
so much
being so transparent and heartfelt about everything. Okay, so some of these are probably going to be short and fast. Some of them you might want to expand on more. So
all right, I'll try to keep it short and fast because I'm notorious for not doing it.
Yeah. One question was asked twice by shout out to Ribbler, Cyprix, and Walton Masson.
Cyprix. I insist on pronouncing the Y so it doesn't sound like an I. Cyprix. Sorry.
You say Cyprix.
You're not Hatrix, you're Hatrix. Sorry, go on.
Oh, okay. All right. We're gonna have a debate about this. Maybe we'll see. Okay.
Maybe we will, because it can't be unilateral anymore. But I'm very strong. I'm Soren Namtiv. Very strong.
All right,
very passionate about this question.
Right on. That's interesting. From these guys or gals, ask him, have you spoken to Galen personally, Curtis, about all of this? And what does he and or Tlon think about this?
I think that's a level of privacy that I don't want to go into. I think that basically, like, that's for, you know, sure. I really, really, really like being transparent about this stuff. And so the fact that basically this had to be done non-transparently is a huge, huge cost. I think that there are still things in the world that need to be done through private conversations, and you know, I think that, you know, this is one of them. So I don't want to like, I love Galen to death. Like, you know, he was in my wedding party, and you know, Galen, if you're listening, I love you.
Great. Perfect. Fair enough. And a question here from Fogbus. In the Urbit Society vision, what is your vision for how Urbit leadership will connect to star owners, separate from outreach / communications targeted to galaxies or planets? In the past,
so galaxies are small enough, there are few enough galaxies that they can deliberate in a way as a Senate. This is why we have what we call the Galactic Senate, you know, and I'm actually a member of the Galactic Senate, in case anyone is comparing me to Palpatine. So you know, but I am, you know, like everyone else at the Urbit Foundation, I serve the Galactic Senate. And, you know, it's really wonderful sort of seeing, again, far from being this being a coup, this is the system sort of designed to operate the way it's supposed to be. So essentially, you know, the stars in this system kind of represent, they're almost a House of Representatives in a sense, except that they're not represented. What the stars are kind of the core economic stakeholders in the system, because that's where, because stars have the right to issue visas. And so basically, you know, what a star really represents is 1/64,000th of basically the right to colonize this new planet. So if you imagine North America being divided into 64,000 rights to colonize, you know, North America, you sort of see the meaning of like holding that. And so what's really important is essentially with star holders is that their interests and the interests of the foundation should be basically aligned. And so that happens through keeping those people on the same course as the galaxy holders, happens through the natural alignment of interests that happens because even though galaxies can be separated from stars, most people have galaxies also have a lot of stars. And so essentially keeping, the essence of politics is basically keeping interests aligned. And so the interests of planet holders are the network become more wonderful and more pleasant to be on and just better. And that also matches the interests of star holders and galaxy holders.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask you a question that's sort of summarizing a few questions in the chat. Basically, there's a lot of demand for a little bit more information about how Mayflower is going to work, basically. And I know you said that it's tentative and not finally determined.
Tentative, and I don't want to. The idea that basically we're in the back room, like making our just decision about how things are going to go, and then we come out with a bayonets and surround the presidential palace, and we're just like, the junta has decided, decree number one, right? Yeah. Not how we do it. So what is there any sort of detail on what people want to know more? And bear in mind, when I'm talking, of course, a kind of tremendous respect for the very complicated world of securities law has always been deep in our DNA, and I don't want to fuck with that too hard.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so some people are asking questions about details that I won't ask you because, we probably can't know that now, and it's probably not worth going into that level of specific questions. People kind of want to know about what's going to happen with planets and this and that. So let's punt on that because we probably don't have that level of granularity right now. But there's a good question from Sarpen that I want to ask you. It's a pointed question about kind of the game theory around the vision and forking namespaces and stuff like that. So
yeah,
I found it a little hard to follow, but I'm just going to read it word for word. He says, so wait, you're telling me I can't just be extremely opinionated, find this situation of chaos as something for me to exploit, acquire a cabal of friends, declare myself as having the foresight that this chaos was to happen to begin with, and start unilaterally pursuing my own esoteric obsessions and grievances with Urbit's status quo, write up a fiery manifesto, and then wind up as a crowned usurper of Urbit's entire ecosystem. But Groundwire are my best friends in the world. Do I have to get new friends?
No, I don't think that. There was a very well written revolutionary manifesto released under that name, and I don't think actually anyone here is looking at forking the namespace or doing sort of anything as dire as that. I think there's a lot of people, and there's sort of always been a lot of people who are basically they're moon or comet sort of true believers, because a comet is like a Bitcoin address. Anyone can generate one. Right? There's no restriction or whatever. A moon is a 64-bit address space. So every planet, there are 4 billion planets, every planet can generate 4 billion moons. So there's effectively an unlimited supply of moons. And so when basically people have a very kind of libertarian ethos, they're basically like, it's really important to make those systems work as well. It's like, so for example, there's a lot of, already in the Urbit world, you'll find spaces that basically are like no comments allowed, right? And it's no comments allowed because this is essentially disposable identity, and there's no accountability for a disposable identity. And non-disposable identities, even if you could get a new planet and it's not very expensive, non-disposable identities behave much better. I mean, our essential theory of spam resistance is that even if a planet costs just a few dollars, like the amount that you're going to make by using that planet to spam is going to not be worth the cost of the planet. Of course, this is improved by the kind of Visa plan, which keeps the party in the kitchen. And therefore, spamming, the only way to deter spammers is to make it not economically successful. Now, on the other hand, no comments need apply kind of is reminiscent of darker periods in our past and dark things that come from the past. And it's kind of, I mean, this is literally anti-comment discrimination. You're discriminating literally economically in favor of, who can afford a planet, as basically we start to get up toward 4 billion and that sort of restriction starts to bite, it starts to feel like really unfair. And I guess what I would say to that is that in the long run, as Urbit succeeds, and this is also something we're looking at working on sort of very soon, actually, in a stupid centralized way. What it needs is reputation and credentials. So it's sort of one thing to say your Hatchrex lasted. It's another thing to say your Hatchrex lasted and you have 10,000 Twitter followers. Your Hatchrex lasted and you have an MD. Your Hatchrex lasted and you won the Nobel Prize. And when I'm interacting with you, even though I don't know who you are, maybe I should be able to see that you won the Nobel Prize. Maybe that will change the way I react to you socially. So I'm like, in a world where all of these systems are well developed, a comet comes in the room and we have the working reputation system to say, okay, on the one hand, it's a comet. Oh, but it looks like that comet won the Nobel Prize, right? And so to the extent that basically people want to kind of open up that space a little bit, maybe use frankly, it's sort of weird to be on Ethereum because I'm kind of, for various temperamental and kind of economic theory related reasons, I'm kind of a bit of a Bitcoin maximalist. And I'm like, if ordinals had been a thing at the time, we might well have put the namespace on Bitcoin. It is on Ethereum. It doesn't really matter. It is where it is. But the combination of that kind of anarchic energy is there. It's welcome. It's really, really good. And frankly, when I basically look at that vision, I'm basically just like, when I see that vision, I see people that are passionate about Urbit and want to keep driving it forward. And like, why would I complain about that? And I'm basically like, why would I complain about that? I don't see, the energy, the vociferous energy of like, I want to fork this thing. I want to basically clone the namespace and make myself the new king of the new namespace, or the new king of half the new namespace, because I'm going to like clone the namespace, but I'm going to write these people out of the namespace so that I don't like them, right? When you look at basically all of the forks of Bitcoin and Ethereum, none of them has succeeded. Good luck holding Ethereum Classic, Bitcoin Clash, Bitcoin SV, I can't even comment, right? All of them that sort of lack this kind of social legitimacy that came with being on the main chain have basically kind of perished. And so, forking energy, whether even just forking kind of the repo, forking energy is sort of always really damaging, but I don't really see that in Groundwire. I see people that basically sort of have this kind of principled libertarian stance and really want to pursue the anarchic edge of the system while making it stronger. And I'm basically like, that's a voice that's needed. That's a voice that needs to be heard. I'm sorry, I sound like a progressive here, but like, those voices need to be heard, right? And I mean that, right? And so like you can mean these things seriously and not with a sort of nasty edge, right? And so like basically I'm just like, what I don't like to see is people leaving Urbit, people trying to like, split Urbit in half. Like that's just a sort of bad and ugly energy. But like all I see out there is like basically good energy. And I see a lot of like, whether there's so many different kinds of factions in this. And that's the sort of one of the beautiful things that like makes it seem alive, is basically that you have all these people that can't necessarily agree or get along, but they're sort of held together by love of the system. You have, Arvo people, you have the Zort people, you have the Talon people, even these sort of vociferous projects that are further outside, the ones that have split off like Plunder, Barkinode, Holium, all these people are still united by the kind of the same broad vision. And even if they're not sort of united by like specifically working on the same thing. And it's just like any amount of unity that you can maintain keeps you working forward, because fundamentally, all of the wisdom that exists about politics can be encapsulated in one three-word sentence, which is ape together strong.
Okay, nice. So Sen asked a question, thoughts on shrubbery, but I think you said already, nuanced statements on shrubbery. So I think that's already
Except the
answered.
name, which is I'm going to just say it. The name is retarded, but that's fine because I didn't invent it, so I don't get to name it.
Okay, fair enough. Ribbler Cyprix.
Cyprex.
Uh, it's going to be very hard for me to.
That's all right. I may be the only one.
I'm
Go on.
quite attached to Hatrix as well, so that's a tough one, but we can discuss. Ribbler Cyprix asks, which section of Craigslist did you meet your first wife on? And many others in the chat were asking where they should try to find their wives right now.
Well, the second question is easier to answer than the first. Obviously, the answer is Urbit. And that means we have to do more to, improve the sex ratio on Urbit, and that's part of creating a great society. But yes, your entire social world should be on Urbit. The answer was it was men seeking women. It was not some deranged whatever. And actually, the story is really. I'll just tell the story as a human. Of course, this is my late wife. Who I met this way. And what happened was that I basically spent all of a Saturday just fucking around and not doing anything useful and wasting time basically, which no one should ever do. And then I was just like, God damn it, it's almost 9 p.m. Trader Joe's is about to close. I got to go to Trader Joe's. I went up at Trader Joe's at 9:01. I'm like, I can't even do that. I need to just go on this thing. And at the time, these dating services where you check boxes and get algorithmically matched is just it's horrifying. These dating apps are just absolutely horrifying to me. And I was just like, here's a thing where I can just post a free form essay about who I am and and so I post this short free form essay about who I am, and 5 minutes later I get this amazing response. I was just like, Craigslist is amazing. It works. This is a really cool response. How many of these really great responses am I going to get? Actually, I got 2 responses, and the other one was lame. And actually, when I had my first date with Jen, she was like, well, actually, I wasn't really browsing this thing because I was looking for a date. I was actually, she was a playwright. And she was browsing this because she was looking for material, because this had already started to go downhill and contain various misogynistic rants by guys, why won't women sleep with me? Women are awful, right? And she needed this as material for a misogynistic character. And then she saw this ad and she's like, I gotta actually answer this, right? So, in a way, it was a reflection of kind of a dying, high quality internet that everyone sort of assumed was a high quality space. It was already kind of funny that I met her on Craigslist. 4 years previously, it would not have been funny that I met her on Craigslist, because Craigslist was basically where all the cool stuff in San Francisco was announced by all the cool people, right? So to see basically Urbit, develop a thing where there's a community of the 2,000 coolest people in San Francisco, and they're on Urbit, and they put classified ads on Urbit because they know that somebody's not going to show up at their house and try to rob them for their electric guitar or something. To see all of those collective phenomena, including dating sites, being reborn in this sort of super high quality society, and then seeing this super high quality society scale to the size of the world but not lose its quality because it develops working reputation systems instead of suffering what was called eternal September on Usenet. That's my dream. So yes, dating is a obviously not in the dating market because I'm married again. Sorry, ladies, but the dating is a super important part of a society.
Okay, great. Love it. So next question. All right. So Curtis, you've said many times that, and you mentioned it in this talk as well, that every social network tends to get worse over time. But one plank of your vision is to cultivate the social network. So Rivmud Fabwen has a good question here. It basically just how do we prevent the quality of the community from declining? What's the trick going to be?
You prevent the quality of the community. I just said it, but let me say it again. You prevent the quality of the community from declining. Sorry, I look like a weird caveman here because I'm now lit only by my screen. You prevent the quality of the network from declining by basically, as you grow toward the broader and broader adoption, you need better and better reputation systems that basically, because originally you have this kind of de facto admission control that comes from you only have early adopters. And that feeling of like being part of the network with only early adopters is so magical and so wonderful and so great, right? That you forget that it just comes from being young. And then one day spammers start showing up. And I remember the moment this happened to Usenet. This is a famous incident in which someone basically this, like, I think immigration law firm or something decided to spam every single Usenet news group with an ad. And then we realized there was no way to stop this. And we realized that our beautiful city would fall to the barbarians. And that's what happened. And so basically, as you grow, of course, the limited size of the address space, the sort of, making an identities non-disposable is meant to help with this, does not entirely solve the problem. Reputation and credentialing systems need to grow as the system grows. And so the ideal world is you come on this network of really high quality conversations, you have no reputation, and before you can contaminate the network with either contaminate the network with your low quality content, or before you can add to the network with the high quality content, you need to go out there and do a bunch of work to prove that you're actually a high quality contributor. And that should be possible even if you're a goddamn good for nothing comment. You can go on there and win the Nobel Prize, and then you'll be treated like a galaxy. Almost. You won't be validating transactions or anything, but makes sense?
Makes sense. Yeah, that does. Question here from Hassan Hassel. Do you know about Milady, and do you understand sort of their cultural logic and why they've been uniquely successful as an art project in the crypto space, for what that says about marketing? Not to copy them, but just, do you have a read on that, and have you learned anything?
Yeah, Milady's fucking awesome. I love those guys. I love, they're weirdos. Like, they're frankly too weird for me, which is saying a lot. And there's a schizo element there that I don't really see as kind of matching the Urbit vibe exactly. We're not quite as schizo as them, and I mean this in the best possible way. Like, the schizo vibe is really wonderful, but the idea of there isn't really sort of a technology base behind Milady, but the idea of we're building this network, which is like a collective art project, and like the arts are like really important, and like the vibe and the cool energy is just like, yeah, I think that Galen managed to reproduce a lot of that energy in a non-schizo way, more of a, frankly, if you don't know Galen, the word I would use, does anyone still say Eurotrash? Galen Wolf-Pauly is like the living avatar of Eurotrash, and so Eurotrash is freaking cool, right? It's always been cool. It's cool by definition. Like, you can't make a black t-shirt not cool. You just can't, right? And so essentially the vibe of having like a style, right? Let's take like Filecoin. Great project, great technology, great ideas, great market cap, but do they have a style? I don't think so. And so like having that style is really, it's a culture. It's really, really essential. And I'm just amazed by what Charlotte Fang, or whatever his freaking name is, has done over there.
Cool. Okay, great. Right on. I'm gonna float another question from Sarpen, because I'm trying to elicit hard questions. And
all right, please give me the hard questions. I do have to put my toddler to sleep. I wish there was a way to describe putting your child to bed that was not a euphemism for euthanasia. I have to put my toddler to sleep, in like 10 or 15. But let's hear the question.
I'm trying to elicit hard questions, and honestly, there's not that many forthcoming. So let's go to Sarpen again. So here, I'm going to read it. It's a little long, but Sarpen has been a very active developer for a while on Urbit. So he says, serious question. A modest but sincere effort of mine since I became involved with Urbit in 2019 has been Web3 integration with Urbit. I've made good efforts, and projects have either pivoted or I burned out because the current kernel stack and Web3 stack have been pitiful for such developments. I've had very notable success persuading Web3 devs and enthusiasts in the importance of Urbit to great excitement, particularly Arvo and the ability to own one's tools and quickly iterate upon them.
All right, I'm just going to
so
cut
on.
this off. I'm going to cut this off. The answer is yes. The answer is we need to really support that, and like having an ENS subdomain that works, big part of that answer. It's like basically, I think, I don't want to be like, I'm not here to be critical of the like choices and directions that were taken in the past, but I think basically Urbit has not shown enough respect and enough love to the crypto community. And, I think that we have to accept that Urbit is a crypto project, and, becoming sort of crypto native in that sense, even though it's actually a pre-crypto project, is sort of an important aspect of that, of our mission going forward. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good on that question. I do think there's kind of another one embedded in here, which is worth discussing. He basically says, he mentions the example of friends.tech, which is basically Twitter profiles with a bonding curve, crap coin attached. And he thinks this poses something of a genuine conundrum for the azimuth-oriented funding direction. Those in Web3 most inclined to use the right-wing associated namespace are those who are very rich but very cynical and mostly want a place to post memes and shill tokens, whereas those most willing to build on the tools they use because they have a genuine belief in innovating governance models and building tools that integrate economic activity, et cetera, as a platform. The ENS and base proposals seem to miss this general dynamic. The Usenet idea is the best I've heard, but to use your own words, it needs to be more. And then it kind of trails off. So I'm trying to.
Well, preserving the universality of the system is really an absolutely core concern here. And no one should feel, I mean, I can't stop you from feeling that this is like a right wing, whatever it means, right? Associated project. And, nobody's forcing you to be here, but like basically there are plenty of, first of all, like the funny thing about my being a radical monarchist is that basically no one else is a radical monarchist. Like, my friends aren't radical monarchists. Like no one believes in this shit the way I do. So it's absolutely fine. Right. And like, I don't actually have a cult of personality at all, and so, but the spirit of like coming in, I think a lot of that is sort of just the vibe of like, being welcoming to like all of these people, and like having this sense of like you're coming in here just to like sort of build the, once people feel the warmth of this kind of community, even if they were drawn into that, even if they were drawn into it by some resemblance between their political ideas and my political ideas, once they're in the community, they basically realize that this is not the point. I want to give one example of sort of a prior case of where this, and perhaps it worked only too well, which is Wikipedia. Wikipedia has kind of become blue sky, if anyone is aware. But the thing is, Wikipedia is a brilliant project, and it was founded by Jimmy Wales. And Jimmy Wales is, of all things, an objectivist. Nothing against objectivists. I am not. An Ayn Rand, extreme libertarian, basically, is an objectivist. But the thing is, basically, just because this thing was founded by an objectivist does not make Wikipedia an objectivist encyclopedia. I might prefer it if it was an objective-based encyclopedia, to be frank, but it isn't. And so, ultimately, it's like, as I said in one of my tweets, the real Urbit is the friends we make along the way. And when I look at the friends we make along the way, I do not see a chant a cult of black-clad chanting techno-fascists or techno-communists or anything like that. That's just not the vibe. And as long as we keep the vibe good, people may think what they want about us, but once they come in the door, they'll basically see that the vibe is good, and that's the only way to win.
Okay, great. I'm trying to read the room and kind of bring this to a head. Why don't we say a hard stop in 5 minutes, if that's good for you? I think that's what you said before.
Yeah, that's ideal.
Trying to read the room. I feel like the most of the critical questions are sort of revolving around, like, I think people are not yet fully understanding or not fully yet convinced like how the Mayflower plan is like distinguishable from a shitcoin. Like why is it going to be better? How is it better? Why is it going to be better? Like
It's
What
essentially the same, the difference between, okay, let's take the reductio ad absurdum and be like, we're going to go on pump.fun. Let's go on pump.fun. I love the project, by the way, and do an Urbit like meme coin. Actually, probably somebody's already done this, but let's do the official Urbit meme coin and basically just pump a low float, like, high volume coin, and we'll pump and dump and make a bunch of money when we pump and dump and put the money into funding Arvo developers. Okay. You know what? It's like you have to regard that as a serious proposal, but it's not really consistent with the ethos of Urbit. And the ethos of Urbit has always been essentially the unity that comes from us all being in the same namespace. And so when I refer to basically Mayflower as not being a shitcoin, Mayflower is just a kind of technical change to the way the existing address space structure works. It's not a new asset, it's an old asset. It's basically just been kind of modified to sort of, fix these markets a little bit better and, kind of, expose certain kinds of liquidity overhangs that exist in the space. But it's basically like the difference between essentially, the Zenith plan was not a shitcoin either, because it was actually definitely designed to be alongside the future of Urbit, but it still had this kind of parallel asset quality, which I really, really, really want to avoid.
Okay, nice. So we have 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask my own question. I'm going to sneak it in, but you can answer in 2 sentences and take off, Curtis. You alluded to the fact that several startups had tried to build on Urbit, and this basically did not work out well. Many of the teams kind of just decided it wasn't going to work out, and you acknowledge this, and you seem to kind of just bite the bullet, like it was too early. It didn't work. I'm curious, with the new vision that you have, you allude in your Twitter thread to the vision of just building normal centralized Web 2 apps, but using Urbit ID. Do you see in the short to medium term, do you see economic opportunities for entrepreneurs and founders, creators to build non-trivial value on the network using your vision?
Definitely.
What would it look like? Can you allude to like anything like
what it would look like is basically, as I said earlier, anywhere where you're using your Urbit name is Urbit. And, that can be any of an almost infinite. So for example, what brought our interim ED Topher to my attention was that he'd created this really cool app called Alphabet, which was like prediction markets with your friends. In other words, like bet on March Madness with your friends. And there's a clear, obviously, regulatory arbitrage thing there. But there are many things like that. Building that, he did an amazing job of sort of putting that together as a decentralized thing. But when you look at your ability to do things within Urbit in a centralized way, within this space of very high quality users, and growing that space of high quality users, I think it's basically very great. Of course, your economic model could be, you need an economic model to be a startup. That could be all over the place. But the thing is, when you're doing that, there's no longer the fear that you're going to do something great and it won't be able to grow for technical reasons. And so I would say the one thing that I'm sort of like, the one bias that I would encourage people doing this to have is that when they're creating user-generated content from Urbit, user-generated content from Urbit by default should be visible only on Urbit, because that basically creates the vibe that this is a new thing. This is the internet for people who hate the internet. This is not part of the old dying web. It hurts me to admit that the web is dying, but it is.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for doing this. I think it clarified a lot of things.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone who was here, everyone who showed up on Urbit, everyone watching on YouTube or Twitter. I hope I was entertaining enough. I'm sorry I look like a caveman lit only by my screen now. It's not who I am. I'm a nice person. I live in the daylight. And I love all of you guys. Thank you so much, Justin. And thank you, everyone.
All right. Excellent. I had like almost 5,000 people watch this total across networks. And have a good night, Curtis. Thanks for everyone who asked questions. Sorry, you can just leave if you need to. I wasn't able to get everyone's questions in just for lack of time, but I did my best. So thanks everyone who asked. And yeah, maybe we'll do more of these. Who knows? We'll see.
Thank you so much. And you can keep talking on the Urbit radio, like, the chat room. The chat never ends.
Yeah.
But for me, it ends because I've got a toddler that I need
Totally.
to
No worries. Have a good
put
night,
to
Curtis.
bed. All right. Have a good night,
Um,
everyone.
Cool. So I'm gonna close the stream. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, I'm curious to see what happens from here. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you later and on Urbit.